Imagine a world where a husband, finding his wife with another man, doesn't draw his sword, but calmly awaits the outcome of their union. In Sparta of the 8th century BC, in the harsh valleys at the foot of Mount Taygetus, a woman's greatest crime was not adultery, but barrenness. This world was built on the laws of the legendary sage Lycurgus, which the Spartans believed he received from the god Apollo himself. And the main law was simple: the state is above all else. And what does a state need, surrounded by hostile neighbors and built on the labor of disenfranchised slaves, the helots, who outnumbered the Spartans 7-1? Soldiers. An endless stream of strong, healthy, genetically perfect soldiers. For the sake of this highest goal, all familiar notions of morality, family, and fidelity were cast aside. Marriage was not a union of hearts, but a state contract for producing offspring. Before we uncover these forgotten pages of suffering, courage, and pain, if you want to learn the truths left out of history books, please like this video and subscribe. Your support helps us give a voice to those who were never heard in their lifetime. Picture Agoge, a hero of many battles, his body covered in scars, his age no longer promising strong progeny. He sees the young athlete Draken, winner of the last Olympic Games, leaving his house. In Agoge's eyes, there is no jealousy, only stern civic pride. He has done his duty. He loaned his young wife to the state, so she could bear the polis, a child from the best seed. This act was not considered shameful. On the contrary, it was the highest form of patriotism, and a woman who bore a champion's child became a revered heroine. Her body, her womb, belonged neither to her nor her husband. They were a most valuable state resource, an incubator working for the needs of the war machine. The real betrayal, a crime against Sparta's future, was to hide one's inability to conceive, or, even worse, to dare refuse the state children. For if encouragement and social pressure didn't work, methods that make one's blood run cold came into play. A woman who dared to deny the state her body faced a fate that demonstrated the very essence of the Spartan system. Her body ceased to be even her own semblance, turning into a passive vessel for the state's seed. Refusing to bear children in Sparta was equivalent to desertion from the battlefield. It was high treason, a biological sabotage. If a Spartan woman, deemed healthy and fit for childbirth by the Council of Elders, the Gerousia, persisted in her refusal, she faced a public punishment, staged as a cold and ruthless sacred ritual. In the city's main square, at the foot of the Temple of Artemis, in the presence of priests and ephors, Sparta's highest officials, the woman was tied to a wooden frame in a humiliating, completely immobile position. She became a nameless object, a living altar for a sacrifice to the collective good, deprived of will and voice. A crowd of Spartans, both men and women, watched in complete silence. This was a lesson for all. Then the Council of Elders would select 3 to 5 of the best warriors. These were champions of competitions, heroes of recent battles, men whose blood and strength were considered a national treasure. They approached not as passionate men, but as dispassionate executors of the state's will, priests of this grim rite. One by one, in ritual silence, broken only by the priest's commands, they would copulate with her. This was not an orgy. It was a cold, calculated, methodical act of insemination. The goal was twofold: to guarantee conception from elite genetic material, and to permanently break the will of any woman who would dare place her desires above her duty to Sparta. If the woman became pregnant, the child born was considered a son of the state, and she, having fulfilled her duty, could return to a normal life, forever marked by the seal of public submission. This was the ultimate manifestation of totalitarian power, complete control over the body, the will, and the very essence of a citizen. But even if a woman submitted voluntarily, the foundation of her family was far from tender. Forget about love and consent. The first night of a Spartan marriage was a simulation of abduction and rape, designed to reduce the sacred union to a brutal, animalistic act of transferring seed. While in Athens, a wedding was a celebration with songs, feasts, and grand processions, in Sparta, according to Plutarch, everything was different. The groom did not ask the bride's father for her hand. He simply abducted her from her parents' home on an appointed day, performing an act of symbolic capture. This was the first demonstration that she now belonged not to her family, but to the world of men and the laws of the polis. But the oddities didn't end there. The bride's friends did not dress her in beautiful gowns. They cut her hair short, almost shaving it to the scalp, like a recruit before being sent to the barracks. Then she was dressed in rough men's clothing and left alone in a completely dark room on a simple straw mat. Late at night, secretly, so as not to be noticed by his barrack comrades, being absent without leave was punishable, the groom would arrive. He was sober and focused, as if he had come to perform a military duty. In complete darkness, without seeing his wife's face, without unnecessary words, he would take her, and then just as secretly return to his barracks, where he continued to live, eat, and sleep with the other warriors. Sometimes, husbands would visit their wives for years, and they would have children before they ever saw each other's faces in the daylight. The meaning of this ritual was simple and cruel: to eradicate all tenderness and affection from marriage. The state feared strong emotional bonds between a man and a woman, for they could become stronger than loyalty to the polis. This was not a union of two people. It was an act of insemination, of subjugating the woman and appropriating her reproductive function. But to become a participant in this brutal ritual and earn the right to reproduce, a man himself had to pass the strictest selection. We are used to thinking of Spartans as warriors, but the state saw them primarily as a tool. To it they were stud stallions whose genetic material was a meticulously catalogued resource. The woman was only half of the equation, the soil for the seed. The quality of the seed was no less important. From early childhood, Spartan boys were carefully evaluated. During training in the gymnasia, amidst the smells of sweat, oil, and dust, gray-haired veterans and state officials watched the youths with the cold gaze of a stock breeder. Height, perfect body proportions, shoulder width, the absence of the slightest physical flaws, even regular facial features, all of it mattered. The ancient Greek ideal, the unity of outer beauty and inner valor, was perverted in Sparta and taken to a utilitarian absolute. A beautiful body was not an object of aesthetic admiration, but a sign of quality genetic material, suitable for reproduction. The annual athletic competitions were not just a sport, but a true exhibition of achievements of the Spartan gene pool. The winner received not only fame, but a special status. He became the golden stock of the nation. His name entered into special lists. It was he who might be asked to lend his seed to the wife of an elderly hero. It was he who was chosen to participate in the rituals of forced insemination. His blood was considered public domain, and his body a standard that the system was obligated to reproduce in the maximum number of copies. In this system, a man was not just a warrior. He was a carrier of a valuable genetic code, a carefully selected producer on a state-run human breeding farm. So the ideal producers are selected. The ideal union, albeit a brutal one, is made. But what awaits the fruit of this union while it is still in the mother's womb? For 9 months, a Spartan woman's body did not belong to her. It was a state object, and her every step, every piece of food, was controlled in the interests of the cargo she carried. The moment a woman realized she was pregnant was a moment of triumph. She had fulfilled her main function, and now her status in society rose sharply. But with status came total control. While in other Greek polis a pregnant woman was considered a fragile creature to be protected, in Sparta it was the opposite. Pregnancy was not a reason to rest, but a period of intensified state service. It was believed that only a strong, active, and hardened mother could bring a strong child into the world. Women were forced to continue their daily exercises, running, light wrestling, discus throwing, almost until the very moment of birth. This was strictly monitored by the elder women of the clan, mothers and mothers-in-law, who acted as supervisors on behalf of the state. Their diet was strictly controlled, no luxury, only simple and nutritious food necessary for forming a strong fetus, the famous iron-rich black broth, barley cakes, goat cheese, a little meat. Any illness or complaint of feeling unwell was viewed with suspicion, as a potential sign that the product might turn out defective. Pregnancy was no mystery. It was a public project, its progress monitored by the entire community. A woman carried not just a child but a future soldier or a future mother of soldiers. This entire period was filled with colossal psychological pressure and fear. Fear of a miscarriage, which would be seen as her personal failure. Fear of not meeting expectations. Fear of producing a substandard product. And so, after 9 months of anxiety, the child is born. But its first cry is not a shout of joy. It is the beginning of the most important and most terrible ordeal of its short life. After 9 months of pregnancy and the pains of childbirth, the mother had no rights. Her child was taken to a commission that, with the dispassion of a farmer, decided whether it would live or be thrown out like trash. Immediately after birth, before the mother could even see its features, the infant was taken by the father. This was his first and foremost duty, to present his child for the state's judgment. He carried the newborn not to a temple, but to the Lesha, a special place where the council of elders, the Gerousia, gathered. These were not just old men. They were former warriors whose bodies held the memory of dozens of battles and whose souls were scorched by the system's cruelty. They did not see a child before them. They saw raw material, a future cog in the war machine. They conducted the inspection with a cold, almost medical meticulousness. They turned the infant over, checked its limbs for symmetry, its spine for curves. They listened to its cry. Was it loud and furious enough? Any defect, even the slightest, a birthmark in the wrong place, a cry too quiet, a barely noticeable asymmetry, was a death sentence. A silent gesture from an elder, a single nod was enough to decide the child's fate. If the verdict was guilty, the father was ordered to take the infant to the apothete, a chasm at the foot of Mount Taygetus. There it was not thrown down. It was simply left in a wild, cold place to die of hunger and exposure, or to be devoured by wild beasts. This was considered a cleaner death, as the community did not shed blood, and the mother waited at home all this time. Her husband's return with empty hands was a silent message. She was forbidden to cry or to mourn. Grieving for a defective product was a crime. A child who did not pass the selection was erased from life, as if it had never existed. But for the few who passed this first, most terrible test, life did not become a gift. It was merely the beginning of another path, the path into the Agoge. The state gave a woman 7 years. 7 years to love her son, to hear his first laugh, to teach him his first words, and then it came and took him away forever, to make him its property. These first 7 years were the only period of childhood a Spartan boy knew. He grew up under his mother's care, in a world of relative freedom and affection. But this world was temporary, an illusion. Both mother and child knew that the day of reckoning was inexorably approaching. On the day a boy turned 7, the Paedonomos, a state official, the head of the Agoge, appeared at the doorstep. He was a stern warrior, often maimed in battle, whose sole task was to oversee the transformation of children into soldiers. For the family, it was a day of mourning that had to be hidden. The mother embraced her son one last time. Her duty was not to shed a single tear, not to show weakness. Perhaps it was then that mothers uttered that famous phrase, "with your shield or on it," which was both a blessing and a curse. For the boy, it was a moment of pure terror. He was torn from his mother and thrown into the world of the barracks, into an agella, a pack of similarly terrified 7-year-old children. The first night in the agella was a lesson in the new reality. A cold stone floor, a rough bed of reeds he had to gather himself, and the cruelty of the older boys, who immediately showed the newcomers their place. Spartan ideologues believed that family love, tenderness, and compassion were a dangerous disease that made a man weak. The agella was a surgical operation to amputate these feelings. The state took the child. Now began the long 13-year process of dismantling him, to forge something else from this material, not a man but a weapon. To create the perfect soldier, you must first kill the person inside him. The Agoge was a 13-year process of methodically destroying all human weaknesses. The system's main goal was not just to educate, but to break the personality, replacing it with a set of instincts and reflexes. They were kept in a state of perpetual hunger. A meager portion of black broth was the norm. This was done not only for hardening but also to foster cunning. The boys were encouraged to steal food. Being caught stealing was a terrible disgrace, punished with a brutal whipping. But the act of theft itself was considered a virtue, a lesson in stealth and resourcefulness. Violence was the primary pedagogical method. The older boys, the Iranes, had unlimited power over the younger ones. They could beat them for the slightest offense, provoke fights among them to identify the strongest, and weed out the weak. This wasn't hazing. It was official policy, designed to eradicate empathy. Any show of emotion, tears, a complaint of pain, even laughter that was too loud was mercilessly punished. The ideal was an impenetrable, stone-like face. Their minds were also kept within strict limits. No philosophy, art, or poetry. Only the memorization of war songs and legends glorifying Sparta. Boys were taught to read and write, just enough to be able to read in order. Free thinking was dangerous. Only obedience was required. Constant, grueling training pushed their bodies to the limit, honing the art of killing and dulling the sense of pain. It was a deliberate program to create social psychopaths, effective on the battlefield but dead inside. For 13 years, the system purged the human from the boy. Now that he had been turned into a perfect predator, he faced his final exam, his first real hunt. The final touch in creating a warrior is to stain his hands with innocent blood. The state demanded a human sacrifice to consecrate its new weapon. This sacrifice was called the Krypteia. It was not just military service, but a secret society, a secret order within the Spartan state. Every year, the ephors would formally declare war on the helots, so that killing them would not be considered a crime from a religious standpoint. Then they selected the most intelligent, cunning, and cruel graduates of the Agoge. They were given only a short dagger and a meager supply of food. By day, they had to hide in the forests and mountains, and by night, they went out to hunt. Their targets were not random slaves. They were ordered to track down and kill the strongest, tallest, and proudest helots, those who could potentially lead a revolt. This was a campaign of preemptive terror, designed to keep the slaves in perpetual fear and to decapitate any possible resistance. Imagine the scene: a youth, raised in a barracks, alone for the first time in the dark, stalking a huge helot working in a field. He must overcome his fear, sneak up unnoticed, and deliver a fatal blow. This murder was the final exam. It proved that the Agoge graduate was capable of cold-blooded violence, that he could kill not in the heat of battle, but methodically and without mercy. Having passed through the Krypteia, the youth became a full-fledged citizen. This ritual sealed his contract with the state in blood, making him an accomplice to the crime and forever binding him to the system. He was initiated into Sparta's greatest secret. Its order is maintained by constant, undisguised terror. And so, the perfect warrior is created. He has passed through all the circles of hell, from the cliffside to the first blood. But the perfect breeding program contained a fatal flaw. In striving for genetic purity, Sparta created a breed incapable of self-reproduction. This is the greatest irony of Spartan history. The longest eugenics program in history led to the complete extinction of its creators. The numbers speak for themselves. During the Greco-Persian Wars in the early 5th century BC, Sparta could field 8,000 to 10,000 full citizen warriors. By the mid-4th century, at the time of the Battle of Leuctra, their number had shrunk to less than 1,500. By the 3rd century, only a few hundred remained. The system was devouring itself. The reasons for this demographic suicide were embedded in its foundations. First, the ruthless selection at birth significantly reduced the number of surviving infants. Second, the grueling conditions of the Agoge and constant warfare led to huge losses among young men. Third, the strict prohibition of marrying outsiders and the limited number of full citizens further restricted opportunities for population growth. But there was another, less obvious reason. Since the best warriors fathered dozens or even hundreds of children with different women, the risk of close-kin marriages in the next generation increased dramatically. A young man and woman considered children of different fathers could in fact share the same hero father. Such marriages, entered into unknowingly, led to an accumulation of genetic defects and a weakening of the gene pool, the exact opposite of what the system intended. Sparta died, suffocated by its own genetic purity and elitism, but its ghost, the dangerous idea of creating a Superman, escaped its tomb and began a long, bloody journey through the pages of history. But what became of the most masculine power in ancient Greece when it had almost no men left? The answer is obvious. Women inherited it. The history of Sparta ended with the most ironic finale imaginable. The land of warriors turned into a kingdom of rich widows. This is not an exaggeration. It was a social catastrophe that Aristotle himself described with astonishment. A system built on absolute male domination contained the seeds of its own matriarchal destruction. Spartan laws, unlike Athenian ones, allowed women to own land and inherit property. While the state was strong and men were numerous, this didn't matter much, but decades of incessant wars, devastating losses in battle, and the constant culling of male infants meant that by the 4th century BC, Spartan men had become an endangered species. Women, however, were protected by the system as a valuable reproductive resource. As a result, through inheritance from fallen fathers, husbands, and brothers, Spartan women began to concentrate the main source of wealth, land, in their hands. In his work Politics, Aristotle wrote with horror and condemnation that in his time women already owned nearly 2/5 of all Spartan land. He called this gynocracy, the rule of women, and considered it one of the main reasons for Sparta's decline. Picture the scene, a city where you can barely see young men on the streets. The Agoge barracks are half empty, and through the streets wealthy and influential matrons ride in expensive clothes accompanied by slaves. They are the mistresses of huge estates who decide whom their daughters will marry and who manage the economy. This was history's final mockery of Lycurgus's laws. The system that saw a woman as nothing more than a passive incubator for birthing soldiers had inadvertently created the most powerful and independent class of women in all of ancient Greece. Thus, the real Sparta died, becoming a kingdom of rich widows, a phantom state. But while its body weakened, its immortal soul, the idea of a perfect, brutal order, was finding new, enthusiastic admirers. How could the greatest minds of humanity look upon this factory of horror at forced pairing, the killing of children, violence as a norm of life, and see in it a model to be emulated? The answer lies in what they were fleeing from. For intellectuals of the 4th century BC, like Plato, their native Athens seemed a world of triumphant chaos. The noisy, unpredictable democracy, the rule of the mob that could execute their teacher Socrates, the corruption and endless political squabbles, all of this disgusted them. And so, in search of an ideal, they turned their gaze to Sparta. They looked at it from across the mountains, and from that distance, they did not see the blood, sweat, and tears. They saw what they wanted to see: order, stability, discipline, an absence of luxury and depravity, the devotion of citizens to a common cause. Plato, an aristocrat and student of Socrates, created his famous utopia in the dialogue The Republic, based on this image. His ideal state, with its caste of warrior guardians, with the community of wives and children, with the state's total control over education and eugenics, is in essence a polished Sparta, cleansed of its filth and organized into a philosophical system. Thus was born the phenomenon that historians call the Spartan mirage. It was an idealized image that had little in common with reality, but proved to be incredibly appealing. Philosophers like Plato and Xenophon became the first devil's advocates. They took a brutal, inhuman practice and wrapped it in the beautiful packaging of a lofty idea about a perfect polis. They separated the result, stoic and incorruptible warriors, from the process of their creation, which was full of unspeakable suffering. It was they who turned a bloody concentration camp into a shining utopia. They cleansed the idea of blood and passed it on to future ages. All that was left was to wait for those who would dare to stain it with blood once more. Unfortunately, the idea of a pure people forged through pain and selection did not die with the ancient Spartans. It smoldered for centuries in the works of philosophers, only to erupt in the 19th and 20th centuries as a fire that nearly burned down all of European civilization. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, admiring the aristocratic radicalism of Sparta, saw in it a prototype of his Superman, the will to power embodied in an entire nation. But the true heir of Sparta became the totalitarian states of the 20th century. History had come full, terrible circle. The entire story of the Spartan breeding program is a tale of how the pursuit of collective immortality through ideal offspring leads to the destruction of the individual, the family, and ultimately society itself. The horror of Sparta is an eternal lesson that as soon as the human body is turned into a resource, be it a woman's womb, a soldier's muscles, or the genome of a future child, human life inevitably loses all value and becomes just another line item in the state's reports. Thank you for watching this video until the end. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments. Your feedback and honest opinion help us create more videos like this.